Daisy stood outside the shop, holding the newspaper in her hands. The headline read, "A congratulatory address for the 4th anniversary of Peace Day, Grand Duke Raphael." She stared at the article, her expression soft and wistful. She quietly thought to herself, he has not changed at all from 4 years ago. She lowered the paper, a faint, melancholic smile crossing her lips. She added, "I wonder if he has been well." Her mind drifted back to the past. A narration box appeared. "After my death, how was the war brought to its end?" A memory flashed, a battlefield lit by a blinding golden light, the silhouette of a great tower crumbling in the distance. 2 military figures stood side by side, one with red hair and one with blonde. A small girl with white hair knelt in front of them. Daisy's inner voice continued, "And does he resent me for leaving in defiance of orders? If he does resent me, would he ever forgive me?" Another memory surfaced. The young blonde man, Grand Duke Raphael, stood beside her, his eyes closed, his head tilted slightly. His voice echoed, "Andert. Sometimes, I find myself thinking that if I had a brother I had lost, it might be you." Daisy's eyes widened. She remembered how she had looked at him in that moment, silent, holding back her true feelings. She thought, "I want to know those answers, and yet..." She added in a quiet whisper to herself, "If you were to learn who I truly am, I fear you may deny every moment we shared, and so I forced myself to turn away." Back in the present, the shopkeeper smiled warmly and asked Daisy, "Is that all for your errands?" Daisy nodded and replied, "Yes." The shopkeeper handed her the sewing thread and added, "If you have the time, do stop by the other shops as well, miss. Never got any discounts of this level." Daisy raised an eyebrow and asked, "Because of the festival?" The shopkeeper nodded cheerfully. "That's right. It's Peace Day after all." The shopkeeper pointed to the street, where colorful banners were fluttering in the breeze, and explained, "Of all days, it commemorates the victory in the magic war." But then a male shopkeeper nearby chimed in. He said, "But the sale isn't because of Peace Day." The female shopkeeper giggled and confirmed, "That's right. Truth be told, there were some bastards who'd been tormenting us for years." The male shopkeeper added, "And they returned 4 years' worth of stall fees all at once." Daisy's eyes widened slightly, a faint sweat drop appearing on her cheek. She had a pretty good idea who was behind that. The female shopkeeper leaned in eagerly. "Haven't you heard? They say some righteous soul gave those pub thugs the thrashing they deserved." She clasped her hands together, stars in her eyes, and gushed, "To us, that's the kind of person who's a real hero. Whoever it was, I'd love to see their face just once. Everyone would be lining up to buy them a meal." The male shopkeeper chuckled and added, "The photographer's younger brother said he'd take a splendid portrait and put it in a newspaper advertisement, too." Daisy's face went completely deadpan, a blank bubble appearing beside her as a tiny sweat drop rolled down her cheek. She quickly changed the subject and said, "Well then, I should be off. I have business elsewhere." She turned and walked away. The shopkeepers called after her, "Of course, do come by our shop again next time." Daisy just kept walking, leaving them behind. The scene shifted back to the Weatherwoods Manor. A narration box appeared, serving lunch. Daisy stood in the hallway, holding a basket, pondering her earlier thoughts. She wondered if the butler fellow had given that order. But then she reconsidered. Keeping the pub open during the day might actually draw in more information. Just then 2 men, the former thugs, now dressed neatly in aprons and vests, approached her with stiff, formal bows. One of them announced loudly, "You have arrived, Captain Maid." Daisy stared at them, completely thrown off by the title. The other thug smiled, clasping his hands together, and said, "First, please take a seat at the bar." He gestured to the back of the pub, where a couple was already eating peacefully. He added that the butler captain had told them she would be coming today, so they had made preparations in advance. Daisy was still puzzled. She asked, "So what is it?" "A note was left for me last night telling me to come here." A flashback showed a folded paper glowing on the floor of the hallway, waiting for her. The thug nodded and handed her an envelope. He said it was meant to be delivered to her. Daisy took the letter and opened it. The text on the page was written in a formal, coded script. She read the words aloud in her mind. "Target confirmed. 1. Exterminate all servants of the Weatherwoods estate. 2. Retrieve all materials and objects within the estate related to Dian Ket. Asterisk beware of the assassin who will come later. Her expression turned cold and sharp. She realized that this confirmed it. Dian Ket's relic was definitely inside the Weatherwoods estate. The thug behind the counter leaned in eagerly and asked what it was. Another thug chimed in, proudly explaining that they had moved in secret through the shadows and gathered information, just as the butler captain had instructed. Daisy looked at them, completely baffled by their enthusiasm. She took a breath and told them that was all well and good. But the two thugs immediately clasped their hands together, their eyes sparkling, and begged her for praise. Daisy was utterly taken aback. She thought to herself that something had clearly gone strange with these two. She sighed and told them they had done well, but warned them not to call her captain. The two thugs immediately snapped to attention and saluted, shouting in unison, "By your command." Daisy just stood there, at a loss for words. Later, Daisy returned to the manor, stepping through the front gate. The head maid was waiting for her. She called out, "Ah, Miss Daisy." Daisy lifted her basket and said the shopping was done. The head maid smiled and thanked her for her hard work. Daisy started to walk past her, saying she would go put things in order. But the head maid raised a hand and stopped her, asking her to wait a moment. Daisy paused and turned around. The head maid clasped her hands together, looking slightly nervous, and apologized for saying something strange all of a sudden. Daisy tilted her head, confused. The head maid hesitated for a moment, then looked Daisy directly in the eye. She asked, "But would you consider disguising yourself as a man?" Daisy's eyes widened in absolute shock. A massive white flash exploded across the panel, and she could barely process what she had just heard. A memory surfaced, a young blonde man in a military uniform, smiling at her with warm eyes. Panic set in. She thought frantically that the head maid wanted her to dress as a man. Had they uncovered her past? No, how could they possibly know? The head maid waited patiently, her expression calm, as Daisy stood frozen in sheer disbelief. The head maid noticed Daisy's frozen expression and immediately softened. She let out a small, apologetic laugh and said, "That startled you, didn't it? I'm sorry." She waved her hand dismissively and added, "Please, just let it go in one ear and out the other." Daisy stood there, still reeling from the sudden question. But as the head maid brushed it off so casually, a wave of relief washed over her. She silently realized that she hadn't been found out after all. She took a breath, steadied herself, and asked the obvious question. "Why must I disguise myself?" The head maid paused, looking slightly embarrassed, and said, "Well," she explained her reasoning. "I was hoping you might attend the noble council in the Viscount's stead." Daisy's eyes widened in disbelief. She couldn't hide her confusion and asked, "The noble council? Why would I go to such a gathering?" The head maid interrupted her by holding up a hand. Then, with a completely straight face, she said, Exactly as Miss Daisy now knows, our Viscount is a smooth little egg, so we cannot go." Daisy stared at her, utterly speechless. A chibi cut-in showed the egg-shaped Viscount wearing a tiny fake mustache and a blue cape, trying and failing to look dignified. The image was so absurd that Daisy was left completely baffled, a long string of silent question marks running through her head. But before she could even process that mental image, a familiar voice cut in from behind her. "Oh ho! I believe I just heard something rather interesting." Daisy spun around, her heart nearly stopping. Lou was standing right behind her, arms crossed, a sly, knowing smile stretched across his face. A large red anger vein pulsed on Daisy's forehead as she stammered, "Mr. Lou." Lou tilted his head, feigning innocent curiosity. He rested his chin on his gloved hand and asked smoothly, "You are saying the faceless master of Weatherwoods is, in fact, an egg?" He leaned in closer, his golden eyes gleaming with mischief, and added, "Do tell me more." "In detail." Daisy stood there, paralyzed, her eye twitching in pure frustration. She had just been caught red-handed. Lou stood there, arms crossed, a teasing smile on his face. He repeated his request, "Please tell me more about that story in more detail." Daisy forced a calm expression, her eyes closed, and replied smoothly, I'm not quite sure what you're talking about, Mr. Liu. The head maid stood beside her, letting out a quiet, awkward ah. Daisy quickly improvised an excuse. She told him, "You must have misheard the master saying you wanted to eat a smooth egg dish." Liu stared at her for a moment, a small escaping his lips as he tilted his head. Then he leaned in slightly and said, "That dish, it must be quite a secret if you're whispering about it behind the chef's back?" Daisy froze, a bead of sweat forming on her temple. Liu continued, his tone light but probing. He asked, "I wonder how amazing the recipe is." He casually leaned against the wall, inspecting his glove, and added, "If it's to the point of making an oath, it must be a secret recipe passed down through generations, right?" Daisy's expression didn't change, but her mind was racing. She thought to herself, sharp guy. What else is on his mind? Liu looked at her and sighed dramatically. "Of course, if you're going to keep it a secret from me, there's nothing I can do." Then a mischievous grin spread across his face. "But giving the information only to Miss Daisy just because she arrived a few days earlier than me is, well, hurtful, shall I say?" A chibi head maid popped up next to him, sweating nervously, as a small thought bubble noted, "I literally just arrived now." He pointed out the absurdity of the situation. There are only 3 employees in total. Daisy remained silent, her eyes fixed on him. Liu's smile faded into a more serious expression. He straightened up and said, "If you really can't trust me, let's do this." He held up his hand and added, "I will also make an oath." He gently touched his own chest. "And additionally, I will also help Miss Daisy with her debutante at the Noble Circle." The head maid gasped, her eyes locking onto his chest. She stammered, "Mr. Liu, those scars are just..." Liu looked down at his chest, where faint, intricate scars were visible beneath his shirt. He smiled lightly and said, "Don't be too surprised. It just means I keep secrets that well." A small chibi thought bubble popped up next to him with a tiny, "If I didn't, I'd have died long ago." Daisy stared at him, her mind reeling. She finally managed to ask, "How many?" Liu paused, looking up thoughtfully. He touched his chin and said, "I haven't counted since reaching 101. Daisy stood frozen, her face blank. The head maid beside her was holding a handkerchief, visibly sweating. Daisy thought to herself, just what kind of guy is he? Even she, who had been through all sorts of ups and downs, had never seen someone with that many oaths. Liu looked at her expectantly and asked, "Now, how about it? Do you feel like letting me know?" He flashed a playful smile and added, "Or I'll cry again, happy face." Later, Daisy stood beside the head maid as she carefully pulled back the curtain, revealing the giant egg once again. Liu stepped forward, his eyes widening in genuine surprise. "Who?" He approached the glass case, his gloved hand gently resting on the shell. He let out a quiet, impressed whisper. "This solid outer shell. Such elegant curves." Daisy stared at him, completely baffled by his reaction. Suddenly, Liu's expression shifted. He pulled out a long, sharp knife from his side. With a single, swift motion, he brought the blade down, striking directly against the egg's surface. The head maid screamed in horror, Mr. Liu, what on earth?" A loud crack echoed through the room. But then, a glowing golden magic circle materialized across the surface of the egg. A text box appeared in the air. "Damage detected." The crack began to glow brightly. A second text box appeared. "Outer shell restoration." Daisy and the head maid watched in stunned silence as the shell magically pieced itself back together, completely undamaged. The golden eye emblem on the egg pulsed softly before fading back into the shell. Liu stood next to the restored egg, a satisfied smirk on his face. He commented, as expected, "This exterior, with its extremely perverted taste." He gestured toward the glowing golden eye emblem on the shell. Even the eye mark that appears when magic is activated. A flashback appeared, a shadowy figure in a hooded robe, holding a glowing sphere, with the golden eye symbol radiating behind them. Liu added, "It seems like an eyeball made by that guy, Dian Ket, doesn't it?" Daisy's eyes flew wide open. She gasped, "What?" A single bead of sweat rolled down her cheek. The head maid immediately shook her head in denial. "That's impossible." I expected the egg to be a magic tool protecting the Viscount, but she pressed her hand against her chest. I can even feel a heartbeat if I put my ear to it. Surely the Viscount is inside. Lou shrugged casually. Let's find out from now on. He pulled out a small piece of paper and began drawing a complex, glowing magic circle in the air with his finger. The runes flared with bright blue light. Daisy stared at the array, stunned. She asked, "A magic interpretation manual?" The head maid was completely taken aback, her eyes sparkling with awe. It's my first time seeing such a detailed magic interpretation. Lou smiled smugly and replied, "Well, that's because it was done by me, an unprecedented genius." A small chibi Lou in a circle nodded proudly. He turned back to the egg and continued his analysis. Anyway, to summarize the purpose of this magic tool. A diagram of a shield bearing the eye symbol appeared, with the text "Protection of the Weatherwoods Family" glowing beneath it. It's designed to activate wide-area attack magic in case of an emergency. He pointed at the diagram. The heartbeat seems to be a wavelength periodically emitted by the danger detection sensor located on the front. His expression turned serious. In other words, unfortunately, the Viscount is not inside. The head maid's face paled. She looked down, visibly shaken. Daisy watched her quietly, noting that even the coldest woman in midwintery seemed shocked. The head maid let out a heavy sigh. I suppose all those years spent protecting it, believing it was the Viscount, would feel futile. She wiped her eyes and looked up at Lou. "Mr. Lou." Her tone shifted completely. "Just where did you appear from, really? Did you learn magic at the academy? At this young age, to perform interpretation magic on sites like this is surely a lack of practice or—" She trailed off, clearly overwhelmed. A small chibi Daisy crossed her arms, looking smug. She thought to herself, "I worried for nothing. Mages are so." The head maid was completely starstruck, her hands clasped together, blushing furiously. But Daisy's expression hardened. She thought, no more than that. "It's been bothering me since a while ago." She looked directly at Lou and called his name. "Lou." He turned to her, his golden eyes curious. Daisy asked him, "Do you know Gensect?" She paused. "You called him that guy earlier." She waited, her gaze steady. "Are you curious?" Lou didn't answer immediately. He just stared at her with a calm, unreadable expression. Daisy continued her internal analysis. Just looking at his reaction, they clearly knew each other. But Gensect was a person who died even before she was born. The fact that such a person was an acquaintance meant that this man was a mage capable of even the forbidden life extension magic. Lou suddenly broke the silence and changed the subject. He smiled and said, "Now that the identity of our interesting employer has been solved." He twirled his hand, a faint magical aura glowing around him. "From what I heard earlier, regarding Miss Daisy's debut at the Noble Circle." A comical chibi of Daisy dressed in a tuxedo and fake mustache popped up, looking absurdly out of place. Lou nodded confidently. "It seems I'll be able to lightly assist with that." He grinned. "Because I'm a genius mage." The head maid nodded in agreement. Certainly, with magic skills of Mr. Lou's level, deceiving them wouldn't be a problem at all. She paused, her expression turning thoughtful. "Rather, the problem is." She looked at Daisy, her hands clasped together. "Somehow, I don't feel at ease sending Miss Daisy alone." Daisy stared at her, confused. The head maid smiled and made a shocking suggestion. "Then, let's have him get married." A diagram showed two hands being joined together by a pink ribbon. She explained, "If we keep someone by her side, we'll be able to control things appropriately." Daisy's eyes widened. She immediately thought, "It's a good idea. But if I were to become the wife, I'd have to leave the mansion, and I have to protect the Viscount too." She shook her head firmly and said, "Don't worry, I can't cause the head maid such trouble." But the head maid wasn't listening. She had already made up her mind. A massive, jagged text burst across the screen, and oh way. Lou, however, didn't look the least bit surprised. He placed his gloved hand over his chest, closed his eyes, and smiled with an air of total confidence. A shimmering pink aura glowed around him. He declared, "I will do it. I'll be the Viscountess of Weatherwoods." Daisy stared at him in absolute disbelief, completely speechless.